for your discussion today. So we want to make this discussion interactive and open-ended. When you hear me talking, just at the beginning. During the rest of the afternoon, we've got an excellent speaker, an excellent panel lined up for you. A heartfelt thank you to all of you for your interest and for being here in person and online. On behalf of the World Bank, Circular Economy, and the ILO, thank you. Before we get going, please allow me to hammer home one basic but really, really important point. It's people who are at the heart of the circular economy. It's not material flows, it's not carbon emission, it's people that make the circular economy work. Be they skilled craftsmen who are maintaining the products, keeping them alive for longer, be it waste pickers who are working relentlessly night and day just to make a livelihood, or be it entrepreneurs who are launching new, innovative circular business models and creating jobs in the process. It's people who make the circular economy work. Ours is a truly human agenda. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to those people who make the circular economy work, there's so much we don't know. We started to look at it in the ILO. We found out, hooray, you can create 7 million new jobs globally by embracing circularity very conservatively in some sectors. Then we found out, under that magical number, we will create 78 million new jobs, but destroy between 71 and 72 million jobs. And these are very conservative figures, but think about the transformation. This is akin to the stuff my grandfather told me about here in Europe when we came out of a terrible war and moved to peace. It's that kind of labor market transformation we'll be looking at. That's what's at stake. But beyond that, we actually don't know very much. We don't know which jobs are being created, where they're being created, for whom. Are they jobs for women, jobs for men? We have very little idea. We are, as they say, flying blind. And if we are flying blind, we will be preaching, we'll be promoting, we'll be advocating for policies that are based on good ideas. They might work because they are good ideas. Our agenda is a powerful one. But I think there'd be better policies if they were based on real evidence, on the closest things we come to facts, statistics, particularly in this world today where there's so much misinformation being spread. So this is, in a nutshell, why we, the World Bank, Circular Economy, and the ILO, has come together. Why we have launched a new initiative to measure, to model, and to monitor jobs in the circular economy. We want to develop a knowledge base. A knowledge base on decent work on jobs that policymakers, decision takers, those who have a stake in labor markets can use to fulfill the promise of the circular economy. We hope that with this session today, for those in the room and online, we will be able to show, discuss with you, also with you online, how better data for jobs, about jobs, is key to realizing full potential of the circular economy. As I said, we have an excellent lineup of speakers who are with us today and ready to explore these questions. And I thank you all for coming. I'll introduce you in just a minute. First, let me go through the program. My friend, former colleague that I've seen, Namita Datta, who's flown in all the way from Washington, D.C. Namita will be providing an overview and a keynote speech in which she will set out the tenets of our new ILO Circular Economy World Bank initiative. Next up, we have Esther, who will be talking us through the first output, the first deliverable of our initiative, a report we launched last month, namely an extensive review of every report that has ever been written about jobs in the circular economy. Because of that work, that we know what we know and what we don't know, jobs in the circular economy. After that, we'll move to a panel discussion with our excellent panelists. We will have experts from business, government, financial organizations, think tanks to further explore the topics. And this is where I count on you in the room and online to ask questions, engage. We fill in, I hope, do my job properly, sufficient time for question and answers. We want to make it engaging and interactive. Those of you online, you can field questions during the chat. I think we have a housekeeping slide. Yeah. So for the online audience, please remember to mute your mics during the event. You can use the Q&A box to ask your questions. And we have a whole team sitting there waiting for them. We'll curate them and we'll hand them over to Esther. And I'll ask Esther to then read them out to the room so we can all hear them. They can feed into our discussion. And everybody, be the good persons you are. Please help me. I need your help. Now, finally, when we close the session, Esther will sum up the reflections for the day. And if there's one key message I would like you to take home, it's the one from before. It's people make the circular economy work. We need better data, better information, better policies for these people. With that, allow me then to introduce our first speaker, Namita Datta. She's the program manager for the Solutions for Youth Employment Initiative. S4YE is a multi-stakeholder partnership which aims to impact the global youth unemployment crisis. Namita has previously led a number of multi-sectoral operations on jobs at the country level, in several regions, including Africa, Western Balkans, and Asia. So, over to you. Please give a round of applause.
Thank you, Jasper, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Really grateful that you decided to spend an hour with us. My name is Namita Datta, and what I wanted to do today was to share with you, as Casper introduced, a new initiative that we are launching. This is just an initial stage, and so what we are hoping to get out of this session are good ideas, good suggestions, and hopefully good partners. So please join us. We are at an early stage. So just I wanted to share with you just some thoughts that we've been discussing among ourselves. So as Casper introduced, there are three of us, three organizations. We started discussing about, let's say, a year ago, the ILO Solutions for Youth Employment that I head. I'm based at the World Bank. This is a big coalition of partners, includes private companies, NGOs, and young people themselves. And the circular economy, and you know the circular economy well, it's based in the Netherlands. So I don't think I need to spend more time on this slide. I think all of us are convinced about why the circular economy needs attention, right? I mean, we all know there's a lot of potential if we move towards a circular approach. We can potentially reduce greenhouse gases. We can reduce resource extraction. We can address the climate change crisis. I think we're all aware of this. I don't think I need to go through this. And I think we're also aware that this is not just important, it's also urgent. We know that the amount of materials that we have extracted in 15 years is actually more than half what we used in 100 years between 1900 to 2000. Right? Not surprising. We are a heavy consuming generation, if I may say so. And these trends are bound to accelerate if we don't do something about it. So it's not just important, it's urgent. But also, as we talk about circularity, we know that this could be, what this is saying to us is let's pause and reflect whether there could be a more sustainable approach to economic growth, right? I mean, and that's the question we are asking, is how to do this. But what is the problem? There are two that I want to highlight here, two that our initiative wants to address. Number one, and to be honest, this is quite evident in how we've been discussing about movement towards circular economy, is that we've been discussing about circular economy from the point of view of the environment, right? But it is so delinked. And of course, this is changing now, and we hope to contribute towards that change. It is quite delinked from how this movement towards circularity can impact or will impact people and their livelihoods, right? I mean, these two agendas seem delinked. Like the whole approach towards the circular economy seems to be in, let's say, the ministries of environment, ministries that are addressing climate change, whereas jobs is something that the Ministry of Labor handles, and usually the two don't talk, right? And I probably am not exaggerating, but the whole people agenda and what it's going to do to jobs is quite delinked. And what does that delink do then? What we are trying to say in our initiative is that just because a job is a green job, need not necessarily be a good job. So let me share with you, for example, electric vehicles, right? Electric vehicles require batteries. Good job, green job? Yes, green job, because it's going to help reduce carbon emissions. But these batteries need cobalt, which is being mined, let's say, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the miners there, are they doing good jobs? Most of them don't have access to social protection. Most of them are exposed to hazardous working conditions. Is that a green job? Well, it's contributing to a green objective, but is that a good job? No, it's not a good job. So a green job need not necessarily, it could be, but need not necessarily be a good job. And if we delink the two agendas, do you see the potential consequences? We might be making unintended, it might have unintended consequences. And what we are trying to say is, let's make this explicit. So that's number one. We want people back in the agenda, front and center of the circular agenda. The second thing, and this is something that I think is being corrected over time, is that we're having this entire conversation without realizing or without seriously understanding what implications it might have for people in the developing countries. So people in the and after the 2 days of the conference, there was this Global South session that happened late in the evening, but I frankly didn't hear a lot of conversation during the 2 days on the implications of people in the developing countries. People in the developing countries do not need the concept of circularity. They're already circular. They're already doing a lot of repair, reuse, recycle. Why? Because it's necessity. It's necessity. These are frugal economies. They don't need the concept of circularity. But what they need is, if you realize the waste pickers that Casper was talking about, they are concentrated, clustered in informal, low productivity, low wage, really hazardous jobs. They are circular jobs, but they are very poor quality jobs. So in the developing countries, the agenda is much more than circularity. It's about good quality jobs. But we are a connected world, right? Our value chains are connected. So we can't say that regulatory initiatives in Europe or in the US have no implications in the developing countries. No, we are quite interlinked. So these are the two things that we want to put front and center of our initiative: the people agenda, and number two, the developing country agenda. Why do we want to do this? Is because we think, now maybe I sounded like a gloom and doom kind of a messenger, but actually what we think is that this whole interest in circularity could be an opportunity. It could be an opportunity to really reap double dividends for the environment and for good quality jobs for workers. And we think that this understanding is important because it will help us make trade-offs. It might help us sequence certain interventions, and it will help policymakers be fully aware of what needs to happen first. So that's essentially how we are thinking about it. Now, where is the opportunity? The idea is, can we actually systematically, in an evidence-driven way, find where are those opportunities for perhaps more labor-intensive nodes in the value chain that may be perhaps requiring low to medium level skills, that may also offer opportunities, particularly for youth. Now, why do I say youth? Why do we care? Because in 2025, millennials, that is those born between 1980 to 1996, they're going to be 75% of the global workforce. So you need to think about youth. They are, any changes in the labor market obviously is going to affect them. But actually, there's another reason why we need to think about youth, because they could be our best allies in this fight towards circularity. This is just a survey that shows a lot of young people feel very strongly about the climate agenda. And they are going to drive consumption patterns. So we really need to be working with young people if we are going to shift towards circularity. So this is just a point that I wanted to make. So where are the jobs? Now, if we think about a value chain, and a lot of us are familiar, right, that down the value chain, there are so many opportunities to introduce circularity, whether it's about repairing, reusing, refurbishing, introducing the shared economy, the sharing economy, reducing the use of waste of materials, the design of products. So as we think about the different nodes of the value chain, can we then identify opportunities for new types of jobs? And can we then not just assume the jobs will come, but make it actually embedded in the way we think about this movement towards circularity? What that means is, let's think about what are the additional jobs that could be created. Let's then also think about what level of skills might that need. Is it a person who's going to do upholstery design? Or is it a repair technician? Or is it a waste collector? Is it a designer who does product design? What is the level of skills that job might need? What kind of skills would that job need? Is it basic skills? Is it problem-solving skills? Is it system skills? So what's the kind of skills that are needed? Might it lend itself to an entry-level job, which means potential for youth employment? Would this be a wage job? Would it be a self-employment job? This is just a framework. We developed this framework to provide a tool for policymakers to be intentional. If you are intentional, means you're asking, where is the job? What kind of skills would this need? And can I develop a skills agenda along with the circular design agenda? Because then that is incorporating the jobs agenda within the movement towards circularity. So we really think it cannot be an afterthought. You have to make the jobs agenda front and center of the circularity agenda. And again, what's the kind of jobs? What's the kind of skills this might need? We think that the core of circular jobs, where it's waste picking, waste sorting, installation, think about it. These are more labor intensive. Some of them may be low skilled. But the peripheral jobs of the circular economy are more high skilled. They are where you have the design engineers, the consultants, the public relations managers, etc. So those are more high skilled jobs. And when you become intentional about the jobs and the skills agenda, you realize that you can't just be working in isolation. You've got to be working with the Ministry of Education. You've got to be working with your Ministry of Statistics to gather the right data. You've got to be working with the Ministry of ICT. And so it's going to need a more comprehensive approach than what we normally assume. So what do we want to do? we are thinking about a 3-year initiative, and we think it'll have 3 pillars. The first pillar will include doing a stakeholder mapping, which we've already done. So check, we did that. We tried to understand who are the important players who are active in this field. Number 2, we want to do a systematic literature review and what's the literature out there. And my colleague Esther will share a little bit some findings from our literature review. And then we want to assess what kind of methodologies, what kind of data do we need in order to assess the implications on jobs. And then pillar 2 will take that to the next level and do sector deep dives. We might also do thematic assessments in terms of gender and jobs. They might be on youth, they might be on skills. And then pillar 3 is more about knowledge sharing and learning together as a community. So these are the 3 pillars that we are thinking about in our work program. And as I said, the idea is to conduct in-depth analysis, to provide more data, provide more evidence. These are tools for policymakers. And also we want to do this in partnership. We want to do this in partnership with various think tanks, with research organizations, with the private sector, with foundations. So if you have ideas and suggestions, please help us make this even more effective and powerful. This is just a little snapshot of how we are thinking about it. We want to work with research institutions, not just those in the north, but also in the developing countries, industry partners, ministries, social partners. So we want this to be multi-stakeholder. And what does success look like for us? Success looks like the fact that jobs and the social and employment aspect of the circularity agenda is embedded ex ante, not as an afterthought, but quite upstream in how we think about circularity. So I'll stop here because my colleague Esther will share a little bit what are next steps coming out of this. So back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Up next is Esther Goodwin-Brown. She is the Circular Jobs Initiative lead at the Circular Economy. This is an initiative that aims to ensure that the transition to a circular economy is fair and creates opportunities for decent work. In addition to leading that initiative, Esther is also one of the leading minds in this field, and I'm therefore extremely proud to be associated with your good work, Esther, which focuses on bringing labor market issues to the center of the green and circular economy agenda, just as it's a call for. Please, we'd be grateful if you could present so that those online, hello, you're still there, can see you, the findings from our brand new report. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Casper and Mita, and everyone here. It's great to have a full house on nearly the last day of the conference, so I appreciate it, and everyone online. Yeah, it's my pleasure to share with you the first output of this joint initiative between Circular Economy, the ILO, and the World Bank. Decent work in the circular economy, and this is an extensive evidence review of research to date on decent work and jobs as it relates to the circular economy. Firstly, starting with a little bit of background on the study. So as Namita introduced, our organisations have come together because we have an interest in advancing a circular economy that's inclusive and just. So to set the strong foundation for this initiative, we decided to do an evidence review that could answer 3 main questions. So what does the existing evidence tell us about decent work in the circular economy? What are the opportunities and the challenges when it comes to promoting decent work? And how could better evidence help to bolster these efforts? So to paraphrase Casper, what do we know and what don't we know but must we know to make sure that we're all moving in the right direction together? And so before diving into some of the main themes from the report, I wanted to share some interesting findings around the evolution of the evidence base. So we found between 1995 and 2022, over 30,000 academic studies have been published on the circular economy in English, but only 1.4% of these have covered decent work in the circular economy. And you can see the number of studies slowly increasing, with a peak in 2021 when 105 studies were published. So from this, we can see that the interest in the social and the economic potential of the circular economy is growing, but is still nascent, and really requires development if we're going to understand it on par with the environmental benefits of the circular economy. When looking at the focus of these studies, we also found some interesting findings. So of all of those studies we reviewed, 84% were focused on understanding circular economy interventions in the global north. And those studies that did focus on the global south were largely focused on the waste management sector. And when we look across these studies, the majority are conducted on the macroeconomic level, so very few looking at what the circular economy means on the industry or firm level. So what do we think this means? We think it means that we need to both zoom out and create more of a global and comprehensive picture of what we know is a very highly interdependent circular economy. And we also need to zoom in to understand what it means for industries, cities, and enterprises around the world. So when we looked across all the existing evidence, we looked for some key themes and found that there are broadly 5, and that we also felt largely summarise the opportunities and challenges that come with promoting decent work in the circular economy. And instead of diving into all of these, I will touch on a few and then invite you all to explore them in depth in the report yourselves. So firstly, labour market transformation. This was a key area of focus because of the one of the main socioeconomic promises of the circular economy being to create jobs through its labour intensity, its opportunity to redesign economies, and with it labour markets. However, we found that there are a lot of variable net employment estimates across studies, and very few studies look at the quality as well as the quantity of jobs. A large focus of these studies is looking at the transformation within what Namita introduced as the core of the circular economy. So recycling and repair, those jobs that are involved in directly closing material cycles. But what we can also see in pockets of the literature is that there's real potential to focus on what we call the enabling shell of the circular economy, that can help to identify regional strengths and competitiveness. So how a country's tech or design industry could be redirected towards supporting the circular economy and upscale it locally. And we all know that the circular economy is highly interdependent, but there were not so many studies that really looked at mapping circular economy across global value chains and really looking at the impact of shifting things. So including looking at the impact on supplier and producer countries, or by bidirectional benefits that could be created and increasing opportunities for North-South collaboration. So we found a few of these studies, so definitely a call to action. And next, on social equity, when we looked at the opportunities for the circular economy to combat lots of social equity issues that we see today, we found that circular jobs are no different from the green jobs agenda, and that there are many of the same barriers that we face. So this could look at calls for needs, maybe direct policy interventions towards promoting the rights and opportunities of women, for example. And these are needed so that we can channel the new opportunities that we know the circular economy can bring towards people that are currently disenfranchised by linear business models and value chains. And by stimulating private sector investment in enterprise development, we also know the circular economy can create jobs because of its labour intensity. But how the circular economy can be used as a tool to create jobs, particularly for young people, as Namita introduced, particularly in countries where there's persistent levels of unemployment, is a very untapped area of research that we think needs to be bolstered. And lastly, on working conditions, because it's all about decent work, we found there's very limited research on the circular economy's impact on existing working conditions. So highlighting the need for research that can really inform policy considerations including how they can be introduced to improve working conditions in the informal sector, which we know represents over 60% of the global workforce and central to the circular economy today. And within the research that did look at working conditions, the focus has largely been on occupational health and safety, largely in waste management and recycling, with other aspects of decent work, including fair remuneration, inclusion and collective bargaining, very much underexplored. And alongside informal workers, with the growth of services that we know comes with the circular economy, the role of atypical workers, including platform workers, is not yet adequately quantified. It's explored qualitatively, but we really don't know the magnitude of this workforce. And this needs to be understood so we can understand the potential implications of new policies that come in on these workers as well. And as we scale already existing levels of circularity around the world, we know that new value chains will emerge and new jobs. And it'll be essential that workers' rights and collective bargaining are upheld so that these new jobs that they're created are good, fair, and well-paid jobs. So summarising on some of our ways forward and also our calls to action. So as I said earlier, we think we need to both zoom in and zoom out to promote more and better jobs in the circular economy. So we need to zoom in to create a more granular and inclusive evidence base on work in the circular economy, understanding the impacts across regions, marginalised groups, and also at the local and the city level, underpinned by globally relevant indicators. We need to zoom out to create a more global and social justice-led picture of the circular economy that can also promote global and social justice-led policy by sharing best practices between countries and value chains, conducting deep dives to really understand these opportunities and challenges we've touched on better, and to examine the different policies and measures and indicators that we need to really understand the impacts of the circular economy across context and maximise those benefits we know it can bring. And finally, I invite you all to jointly advocate for a more inclusive circular economy, both by creating data and knowledge partnerships to make sure that the people already working in the circular economy are visible and that we can maximise the benefits that the circular economy brings around the world. So finishing here, inviting you all to download the report, share it, read it, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. There's some we know, but there's so much we don't know. Thank you also for making the point that yes, it's people that are part of this circular economy. It's a human-centered agenda we're promoting, and it's an agenda that's based on human rights. Otherwise, we will recycle all the bad things from within the economy into the circular economy, and that's not what we want. No more talking from me. We have an excellent panel lined up. Those of you online, be ready to field your questions, because I think we'll take some of your questions first when we open for question and answers in the name of inclusivity, but also here in the room, keep your questions at the ready. The panel we have for you today consists of government officials, officials from international organizations, business, and think tanks. People who work on the topics we talk about today every day. Without further ado, please let me introduce Eero Jallava. Eero let's give him a round of applause. Eero is a freedom specialist in Citra's Global Collaboration Team for Sustainability Solutions. Follows the many agendas, including climate, biodiversity, circular economy within the EU, and leads your team's stakeholder engagement. Previously, you worked for the Citra Circular Economy team and was responsible for some of the first studies and pilot projects on skills. Also, please, a nice big round of applause from Margaret Kamau. Margaret is the Principal Climate Change and Green Growth Officer for the East African region at the African Development Bank Group, where you work on climate mainstreaming and climate finance for bank investments. In addition, Margaret supports the coordination of the African Circular Economy Alliance Secretariat hosted at the bank, working closely with African governments across the continent, a beautiful continent, and partners to promote the circular economy in Africa and globally. Warm round of applause for Solomon Noy. Is the head of waste management at the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, which is the political administrative authority for the city of Accra. In your work, you address not just waste management, but also environmental sanitation solutions, the protection of the local environment, and public health. I think it's fair to say that circularity is something you do every day. Last but not least, Janne Peljo, hand of the floor. Key policy advisor on climate and biodiversity at the Confederation of Finnish Industries, which is the largest, leading, and most important business organization in Finland, representing the entire private sector at national, EU, and international level. He's a renowned expert in climate and biodiversity related topics, and he has previously worked here at Citra, so welcome home.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And for me, working for the ILO, where we are not just serving governments, but also workers and employers, it's always a special privilege to have an employer representative on panels I'm moderating. Now, starting with you, Eero, a big part of your work when you promote the circular economy with businesses, partners, and educational institutions here in Finland is about putting people at the center. To what extent, when you talk to partners, new businesses, educational institutions, is what we heard Namita talk about, to what extent is the impact of circular economy on jobs, on labor market and skills part of your conversations?
Quite a lot, actually. First of all, we need more data and evidence of circular jobs also in Finland, since we haven't calculated the numbers, but we have done a lot of qualitative research, launched reports on basically what are the new skills and competence needs. And we have done that sector specifically, for example, in chemistry, technology and construction sector. And that's one of the issues which have been raised most attraction, that what are the new skills and how workers can be skills could be updated, and also what kind of a flexibility in the society will be needed, that it would enable workers to be pre-skilled and also upskilled flexibly. So there's a lot of investments at the moment in Finland related to a circular economy, but it's not that clear that what is the impact on the whole job market. But we have some results from sector specifically. For example, the sectors which I've mentioned, we actually published a study early this year which looked quite deeply on these three sectors.
Excellent. So circular economy is here. Finland is embracing it. It's actively promoting it, but there's a real fear that you won't have the right skills in the right places at the right time. Is that correctly understood?
That is correct. We need more, for example, collaboration between educational institutions and businesses, and also labor unions. And for example, Citra funded circular economy training pilots, which were planned together with businesses, educational institutions and labor unions in order to gather all the information we have from these sectors.
Super interesting. Turning to you, Margaret, what do you see as the biggest potential the circular economy could play in promoting green jobs and creating good green growth and creating good jobs, whilst also addressing climate change in Africa? So turning from Finland, where we have productive agenda skills is the issue, what do you see as the potential of the circular economy in Africa through your work?
Thank you, Caspar. And maybe I guess to just start off, I think I'd like to say, in your opening remarks, you talked about it's about the people, and I think, the way you put it forward is something perhaps I hadn't really thought through well, but it's very clear, what everything that we do should be about the people that we're working to serve. And then, of course, Namita put it so clearly in her presentation about decent jobs. It's not just job creation as we do our investment, but it should be decent jobs. So to help give an overview of some of the work that, to answer your question, but I'll start by giving an overview of some of the work that we're doing related to circular economy. So starting from the high level, we do, of course, host the Africa Circular Economy Alliance, which is a platform that aims to bring member countries together to promote circular economy. And we also do host the Africa Circular Economy Facility through the generous support, of course, of the government of Finland and the Nordic Development Fund. Now, the two are linked because the facility is helping to fund some of the activities that would help promote circular economy in Africa. That's through, for example, the development of roadmaps and strategies. But more importantly, the next phase would be looking at innovation hubs and ways to drive investment in circular economy. So that's at the high level. And then what are we actually doing, midstream? What is the bank actually doing related to circular economy and jobs? So there are two aspects here. One is on the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, which is a program that was launched in 2021. It's a partnership between Africa Development Bank, the Global Center on Adaptation, and other partners, of course, have come on board. Within the AAAP, there are 4 pillars, but the main one that I'd like to focus on is the Youth Adapt pillar. So the realization around promoting adaptation in Africa, because of course we know adaptation is key. Mitigation is important, but adaptation is key for Africa. The Youth Adapt pillar aims to identify what the youth how the youth could support a climate resilient future for the continent. Specifically, we have run 2 solutions challenge competitions. So we call it the Youth Adapt Solutions Challenge. If you're followed as a COP, we have launched them at the 2 previous COPs and announced the winners at those. And they've been, very good ways of driving interest in adaptation, driving interest in youth innovation and in SMEs in Africa. So currently we have about 10 companies funded through that program that are actually working on circular economy solutions. Perhaps when they started, they did not think this is circular economy. It was a need that they were trying to meet, or a business idea that they thought, this could work. But, based on our work together, we've now identified that those are actually circular economy solutions and could actually be promoted across the continent. So that's the Youth Adapt pillar. On the other end, we do have we're working on an initiative known as the Africa Green Financing Facility. So this is an initiative that will try to work with commercial banks and linking that with the SME financing facility that will aim to ensure that SMEs that are not able to access financing typically because perhaps the idea is novel and maybe the commercial bank may not know how to, how do you quantify the risk on this investment? So working closely with commercial banks and these SMEs through the facilities, we'll be able to channel financing related to green financing, but also circular economy innovations, because we know for Africa, these are quite still at the pilot level. So I'd say those are the initiatives that we're trying to roll out at the bank. And of course, the idea would be at the end of it, we have jobs created, because within our results measurement framework, we are very clear about job creation. It's one of the deliverables that we are measured against on an annual basis. And we're taking a step forward now to try and define adaptation jobs. So we are actually undertaking a study currently supported by PwC to understand what mainstreaming adaptation jobs would mean. This includes undertaking a landscape study of, this is the landscape currently in Africa. This is the market, this is the demand and supply that exists. And therefore, we would then be able to quantify the types of jobs that we could create through our investments across Africa. So that's, I think, the step that we're taking towards creating jobs, and particularly in the circular economy space.
Great. It sounds to me like you're attacking two key challenges. The first is, I think there's abundant knowledge, innovation, ideas across Africa, but that ingenuity of young entrepreneurs is not often recognized. But with a challenge, you're providing innovative business models to be identified, and you recognize them for what they are, game-changing business models. And then the other challenge, which is equally important, is you're solving a huge issue of addressing barriers and access to finance that these businesses, because banks simply don't know what a circular business model is, and what risks are involved, and whether it's safe to finance it. So those two things are key barriers, I think, to address. Maybe the next challenge could be a circular business model challenge.
Actually, yes,
Yeah.
we were actually debating whether we should have a thematic window on circular economy.
I think
So
that
something to take back.
debate ends here today. We're just going to do it. Solomon, turning to you. You are at the forefront, at the front line of one of the biggest challenges municipalities and countries are facing all over the world, and that's the waste management challenge. How do you see circularity and the transition to the circular economy can be used to generate more and better jobs in waste management? What's your experiences from your daily work on circularity in Accra?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I will agree with Namita. Yes, when she said we were already into circularity back home. It is very true. We realize that as the city of Accra, as managers managing the city, we were faced with a big challenge. And that challenge was non-availability of final disposal site. We did not have any space within Accra for use as a final disposal site. Because we were part of the Alliance for C40 cities, and most of the dump sites that we have within the city of Accra were capped and closed down. And that left us with no option than to take our waste all the way to a sister town called Tema, the port city, where the only infrastructure that the World Bank funded us to construct was the engineered landfill. But once we closed all the dump sites, the engineered landfill was designed to take just 500 metric tons of municipal solid waste per day. Accra Waste added, and it ballooned to 3,000 metric tons per day. So the lifespan, the design life of the landfill, which was supposed to be 25 years plus, was cut short by 3 to 6 years. Within 6 years, it was full. Not only full, but there were complications. It caught up into flames, and then we have to also abruptly cap it. So the way forward, as we realized, was to team up with academia to help us to conduct analysis to understand our waste. So we did our waste characterization analysis and other inventories. And then we realized that the only way forward was to adapt circular economy model in waste management than the usual buy, use, and throw, which is the linear economy system. It was not helping us, it was rather killing us. And how do we do this? We developed quickly what we call the Accra Climate Action Plan. And in that action plan, it was necessary because it came up that poor waste management contributed to 44% of our greenhouse emissions. It was published. And therefore, we vigorously championed the objective of making sure that we divert 50% or more of our municipal solid waste from the landfills by processing the waste and not dumping raw waste. How do we do it? From academia, we realize that organic waste components of our waste forms about 54%, followed by the plastics. It was amazing. Plastics, if you add the styrofoams and the other problematic plastic, we were within 18% plus of plastics. But then we do not separate our waste as source. We put everything together. And therefore, the organics tend to contaminate the other forms of waste. So the waste pickers, which we rely on for this particular circular economy thing, they go in, pick the plastics and the paper and whatever they want. It is heavily contaminated with the organic waste. We tried instituting what we call material recovery facilities, where machines will be doing the separation. It didn't work. Why? Because a high organic content coupled with high moisture content made the leachate within the waste very viscous. It was sticky. So you put it into the mixed waste into the machine, all the organics are stuck to the other forms of waste. And then you get a high amount of refuse-derived fuel, contaminated, no factory can use it. So you put in garbage, you receive garbage. And therefore, the only way out was to do source separation of waste. And this, we needed a lot of stakeholder engagements. And that is where the jobs creation came in. We have a very excellent informal sector players within the city of Accra. These are technical guys whose basic education at most will be basic level, but you have no idea their level of ingenuity. Exactly. They can fabricate all sorts of machines and motors on their own using scraps to be able to recycle plastics. So we identify them. Then the very waste pickers, informal pickers, we realize that we need to integrate them in our circular model. And therefore we assisted them to form cooperatives. As we speak, they are in the formation of the cooperatives. We have 3 cooperatives formed, made up of no less than 50 members in each cooperative. Then we have those who will also do the aggregation, the source separated waste. Where do we take them to? And this is where we need these informal guys to come in. We've also put them together, and then they will help us to process the source separated waste. The biggest problem was, what do you do with the organics? Because no waste picker is interested in the organics. It smells, it is not sexy. So the city authority has taken upon itself, in collaboration with other funding partners like African Development Bank, World Bank, and others, we are scoping through so that we will put up what we call anaerobic digestion plants. We already have one based in Ashama. It is producing electricity with a Dutch company, but the scale is too small for our generation. So we want to go into anaerobic digestion because we realize that if you want to treat or process organic waste using just composting, our carbon to nitrogen ratio is not conducive to support composting in commercial quantities. And therefore, we want to go into anaerobic digestion to produce biogas, refine it into biomethane, compress it, and then give it as substitute for LPG gas production by the households, in order to prevent them from relying on charcoal and firewood so that they will not destroy the mangroves and the vegetation. But we have 2 main outliers, which is electronic waste and textile waste, which are coming through demand and supply, importation and of these products. And that is huge on our necks. And whilst the dismantled e-waste equipments are bulky and heavy, they contribute in choking our landfills. At the same time, the poor quality of textile waste that is coming through the ports is also helping to, they were the culprit in our landfill getting into flames, because they helped by creating a barrier within the middle layer of the landfill and then suppress leachate. And therefore the gas, methane gas that was being produced beneath could not penetrate the leachate into the ventilation pipes. And that is what accumulated a lot of methane gas to sustain the fire when it.
Let me interrupt you just there, Solomon. Super fascinating thoughts. There's so many, so rich what you're sharing with us. But one key point I think that you said is we need massive investments to handle waste. There's no way around. We need massive investments in infrastructure and in systems. At the same time, of course, we need massive investments in reducing waste. And I think the key to that is what you just said, that there's value in waste. If you actually dissect the waste, you can and segregate it, you can understand where the value is, and you can create incentives around treating the waste as a value, and therefore you can avoid it being waste in the first place. And I think those are key to facilitating a just transition to the circular economy, just as investing in entrepreneurs is, just as providing access to finance, but we also need public investments in infrastructure and waste systems. And we need to be able and have better research with academics to see the value in waste. And then finally, I think you're addressing a key challenge, which is that of informality. 60% we heard of the world's workforce is working in the informal sector. So it's not unique to Ghana. Most of those who work in waste management here in Europe are working in the informal sector as well. But what are the solutions? And you mentioned them. It's, among others, cooperatives. If you can invest in a cooperative, you can impart training and knowledge on cooperatives, you can share knowledge between them. And that is, again, something which is really exciting, because that means that perhaps the circular economy can be a more social economy. So turning from the waste management sites of Accra to Helsinki in the high north, you're also dealing with circularity every day. When you speak to your members of the Finnish Confederation of Industries, it seems to me that there's a whole ecosystem of businesses that have bought into the agenda, that sees the potential.
Yes.
What is the potential for them, and what are the barriers your members are facing?
Yeah, that's a big question, actually. Of course, kind of the key thing is that everyone knows what we need to do in terms of curbing climate change and in terms of how big biodiversity loss. But then how do you actually make it happen in concrete terms and everyday business decisions? Mm-hmm. That's the more difficult part. Yeah. And what Salman was explaining, kind of one of the big issues is just the sheer scales of the operations that will need to be kind of refurbished or redesigned to be more circular or fully circular. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the key issues I think many of our companies are currently dealing with. We're quite good in recycling stuff. That's something we are quite efficient in. We are good in collecting kind of raw materials and disposed materials, and then getting back them as a feedstock in another process. But that's a lower value add use. So we are kind of halfway towards full circularity in just taking a part of it. So we're not yet living in a circular economy. It's more about the recycling economy. But that's of course a source of inspiration that also has changed. I think the biggest barrier for all firms and actually all operators in society is the power of status quo. So what we need to overcome is actually something that has been built up over decades of planning and decisions and hard work. And now the new solutions and new ways of working need to be able to overcome that, hopefully in just a matter of a few years. So that's a very difficult thing to achieve, but we are quite positive that we can do that. It's about technology development. It's about kind of redesigning processes. I was just today in a hydrogen-related event, and that's all about recycling carbon, actually. So we take the power from sun and wind, and then we kind of use water to produce hydrogen, and then we source that together with carbon taken from biosources, and then we can basically generate all petrochemicals in the world. So that's circular economy at full. But the difficulty is that the hydrogen industry, that's very nascent at this stage, it will need to be able to overcome the major oil and gas players that are dominating the energy related commodities markets. And that's a big task to do. But I'm happy that we have very brave entrepreneurs and investors that are kind of taking the bull at its horns.
Oh, excellent. And I think with what you're saying is also the importance of creating an enabling environment of policy, a stable policy framework with the right incentives for these businesses and these investors to take these informed risks.
Yes, and that's exactly what we need. We need the kind of political leadership in a way that somebody needs to be able to build the vision that this is the direction we're headed towards. We don't accept throwing value-add components to waste. We don't accept going to landfills because that's going to be a big issue in the future. We need to be able to redesign our processes and how we run this society. And businesses are actually quite good at doing, but somebody needs to be able to show them the way that this is the way we are headed towards. If you invest millions or even billions in developing processes and technologies to be able to cut down emissions or cut down waste, then you need to be able to be sure that the investment environment is something that you will be able to get kind of returns on your investments over the coming decades.
Yeah. Hand on heart, do some of your members see the circular economy as a threat?
Yeah, we have 90,000 members, so I think there are some there.
Some of them have built the linear economy that we know, right? So
yeah, I think the biggest threats are actually kind of more macro level, related to the overall business environment, where circular economy is just one part of us being under pressure to invent or renew things how we do it.
Yeah.
And then that brings us to, for example, in Finland, we are kind of a aging society. In a few decades, our labor force will start diminishing.
Yeah.
So we will need to be able to kind of go into circular economy at full scale without
enough hands. Without enough hands.
So it will need much more automation, much more efficient logistics, and much more savvier engineers. Yeah. And those will be, of course, very good paying jobs.
Yeah. I think you mentioned there also something which is absolutely key, and which you mentioned also, Solomon, is the importance of technology. So up there with massive investments in infrastructure and systems, access to finance, technology is there as well. This needs to be an innovative, vibrant economy where those who need it have access to the latest, both digital but also automation technologies out there. Now, I have a whole bunch of other questions. In fact, we were hoping to have 2 rounds. But if I go there, you won't get a chance to ask questions. And that would be unfair because I wouldn't keep what I promised. So panelists, do you mind? I don't ask you your second round pre-prepared questions, and we take some real questions from real members of the audience and those online. Yes, have we have some come in already?
We do indeed. So first question, maybe this one for Margaret, is what practical tools and strategies can investors use to mitigate the risk of poor quality green jobs in waste management and recycling projects in developing countries? Yes. So
I need to have that repeated too. I'm not sure I understood it.
So
that's just me.
What practical tools and strategies can investors use to mitigate the risk of creating poor quality jobs in the circular economy? Essentially.
So when you invest in circular businesses, what are you doing to avoid that the jobs become poor quality, or conversely become the best possible jobs?
We take the.
Please.
Okay, sure. So that's a very interesting question, and of course, I think the answer would be very context specific, depending on the region within which the investor is looking into entering. But I think there's some basic principles that could be used to define whether this is a quality job in the circular economy space. One, of course, would be mitigation or adaptation. You have to look at the value of mitigation and adaptation there. You know, is it meeting one of the criteria within GHG emissions reduction, or helping a community or people to adapt to the challenge of climate change. One aspect we're also looking at is increase in youth employment, because we do realize that, I mean, we've talked about it, you need hands, you know, we talked about automation, but in Africa, you'd actually need hands to do the work that you want to do. So if you're seeing an increase in employment, and particularly within a certain segment, perhaps that could be one criteria that would also apply. Skills development is a crucial one. If by rolling out this investment, the investor is able to upskill the target community, develop certain skills that perhaps may not be existing, and even leverage on existing skills. There's a lot of technical and vocational education that's going on in Africa, but not being applied fully. So I think that is also one area that could be looked at. And finally, of course, the metric that would be most important would be around livelihoods, improved livelihoods and income. Are you helping to improve the income levels of the target community? Are you helping people's livelihoods? And I think that links with the work that we all do at the bank. We aim to, that's within our high five agenda. That's what we always aim to achieve.
The high five agenda.
Yes, making people's lives better.
Excellent, I love that. And I think here maybe we can also come in, Namita, as we were former bankers ourselves once. Of course, there are frameworks that the African Development Bank has adopted as well, with performance standards, to make sure that no investment that the bank undertakes will have harmful impacts. So there's a whole checklist approach before you go into a new project or a new business, right? But often that's what it is. It's a checklist, do no harm. I think what you highlighted there, Margaret, was when you look at the investment, are you then looking at the context? Are you addressing a real youth and unemployment problem there? How can you best draw on the skills that are available in the communities? And I think that's very important to think in, not make it an ex post, an afterthought, right? But think about upfront what kind of positive social impact you want to create with your investment as an investment. Are there other equally brilliant questions, but maybe something easier for me to understand?
Oh, I know from that.
Oh, I know.
Ouch.
One was several of the speakers, and including our partners, emphasised the need for better data for a more just circular economy. But what are the current data issues?
Let's take a rapid fire from this end to this end. So what are the data you want that you can get?
Of course, data is it's a universe of different topics, but then kind of going in very short, the thing that our companies most complain about in terms of circular economy is that you don't get the data about the raw materials or their kind of history and their lifetime or how they have been circulated, and you don't have full transparency on the value chains. So when you don't know what you have in your products in full, then it's of course much more difficult than take them back to circulation. So getting more product and raw material based data that actually kind of transparently helps you track through the whole value chain would be just perfect.
Yeah, I was saying it's people who are at the center of the circular economy, but it is of course also flows, yes. And we need better data, right? And imagine if we had it. The ships that are being broken in India, they contain the best steel in the world. But because that steel is not certified, when the ship recycler sells it on for construction in the boom in India, they get a fraction of the value of that steel. If that steel could be certified, if we knew where it was coming from, there should be much higher profitability in that business, and therefore also room to hopefully create better working conditions. So absolutely key, I would say, for better informed business decisions and models. Solomon, what is your dream?
Same for us. You know, I mentioned two outliers, textile waste and electronic waste.
Yes.
For instance, we need data for our brands, the big players, especially in the fast fashion industry, to disclose that quantum of textile materials or clothing that they churn out. Because we are in conversation of reforming the extended producer responsibility on textiles
And why
to be
can't you get that
globally
information?
accountable.
Why can't you get that information? It's not a military secret that this is made of cotton and buttons and
But you know, I don't know whether it is their trademark secret. They will not want to publicly show that. So for us to be able to adequately get hold on the quantities that are flying into our end of
Yes.
the global south,
Yeah.
we need this data to be able to plan.
to convert it into value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For instance, that is where we are grateful to the All Foundation and NGO. We are in talks with Pure Waste in Finland. They have the expertise to be able to process discarded textile materials and convert them back into yarns or some back into paper.
Yes.
You can convert cotton to paper.
Yeah.
These are the technologies we are looking at. So if we do not have the data of what we are to anticipate on a weekly basis,
Yeah.
how do we do the planning?
Okay.
Another one is the data on plastics. We are going to embark on this massive source separation where the plastics will be clean in order for the informal guys to be able to process, and we want to not rely on anybody at the global north for processing, because when COVID came, we learned our lessons. Assuming some environmental disaster has happened, everybody says, stop bringing me your pellets or waste plastic materials. Where do we go? We have to process them in-house. But then, most often than not, you see people saying they are into recycling, but they add virgin plastics to the waste plastics in order to come up with new products. We also need them to disclose the quantum of these virgin plastics that are coming in for the big players like Coca-Cola. Sorry, I'm mentioning this, but just to give examples. Just to give examples, the big sector players to be able to, yes, to also come in to help in our policies, just to make sure that we leave nobody behind and get all the products back from the environment and treat them.
Thank you. Again, just because it's rapid fire, what data are you dreaming of that you can get?
Well, I would say feedback on the user experience. You know, there's often a dissection between user design and user experience. So, you know, in developing this circular economy innovations, let me give the example of the country I'm from, Kenya. We had a plastics ban, use of plastics ban a few years back, and there was an evolution into the use of a cloth bag. And it turned out, you know, the initial phase of that rollout, the cloth bag that was distributed was of very poor quality, and very quickly people rolled back into plastics, you know. So that was, I guess, whoever designed the bag did not really think about what is going to be used for, carrying heavy fruits and vegetables, carrying this and that. So there was no thought process as to the end user design versus the experience. And I would say this is the same thing for any innovation that we roll out.
Yeah.
And we're always looking for it when we undertake our investments. We always then go back and ask, how was this received? How would you change it if we were to do it again?
Yeah.
So in summary, I'd say it's about that, how the user experiences this circular economy innovation or this a new idea that we roll out.
So learning from what works, but also learning from what don't work, so we can quickly course correct. I mean, it is going to be an iterative, dynamic process as we move to the circular economy, for sure.
I'd like to raise the point that regulation could help to provide more data. For example, in the EU, we will have this eco-design for sustainable products regulation, which will require sustainability performance data, quality on raw materials, which chemicals have been used on clothing or other products, and it's crucial since otherwise it's hard to recycle, hard to repair, hard to refurbish.
Absolutely.
And digital product passports will be a one tool to
do that.
But which data I would like to have more, well, number of circular jobs, sector specifically, and also those qualities, and also the level of education needed sector specifically, since there's a lot of variation.
Yeah, this is where I'm personally thinking in the back of my head, what is this crazy initiative that I've been part of starting? Because think about it. How do we define a circular job? Statistically, I mean, going through all the occupations in ISEC and ISCO, how do we even begin to define what is a circular job? Is it a landfill job? Is it an entrepreneur job? Is it a financier job? What is it? And then, which models do we actually use to estimate how many jobs there are today, and under certain policy scenarios, how many jobs could we create in the future, provided the right financing and policies and so on in place? And finally, where the hell are we going to get the data from? Because most of this, as we heard, is in the informal economy. But we are not afraid. At the same time, we need help. So please partner with us, because these are the very, very real challenges that we will have to address in the next 18 months to 24 months to come up with the world's first authoritative proposals for how we can define a circular job, suggestions for the methodologies you might want to use to measure and model them, including their quality. And hopefully in 2024, 2025, maybe at the UN Conference on Sustainable Consumption and Production, will we be able to launch the world's first authoritative estimates of jobs in the circular economy. And I think that helps, because you can go to your members and you can say, we can create so many jobs. You can go to your mayor and say, Mr. Mayor, I need more money. I need better data because I can create this many jobs. You can report back to your board how many jobs your investments are creating. I don't have to convince you, Hero. You already bought into it. Let's take some questions from the room. Over there. Please, could you present yourself before?
My name is Müge Dolan. I am a project manager at United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And currently I manage a portfolio of circular economy projects, two in Ghana, one with JEF funding, one with Global Affairs Canada funding. I have two projects that are piloting circular economy in textiles, plastics, and ICT electronic sectors, one a regional project in Southern Mediterranean, one global project. And I wanted to say, in all of these projects already ongoing, we have an ask already from the donors, from our beneficiary countries, to make an estimate of how many jobs these projects are going to be at least helping to sustain, or the definitions. If you look at the EU standard set of indicators, there's a really beautiful indicator there about number of jobs sustained. But when you ask, so what is the methodology to actually measure this, especially for green jobs or even worse, circular economy jobs, there is no answer. So it's maybe both a question, but also an offer. I read the publication and I found the research aspects really interesting, but I also have a feeling that there's an untapped potential using projects like ours that have actually this need to generate the methodology and also test it, okay, on a really the micro level, at the firm level or the sectorial level, to create this methodology to be able to measure as rigorously as we can, because I think there's a lot of methodological issues.
Yes.
From control groups to informal sector jobs to et cetera, et cetera. So I was wondering if in the research itself, you've come across any work that we can already reference. Indeed, it's a fairly urgent need for us to be able to identify the resources and also partner with colleagues like yourself to work on this and come up with a methodology that we can say, okay, we're comfortable at least with the level of data we have. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that comment and that question. We have a partner, which is what we wanted. So yes, and let's follow up on that specifically on methodologies afterwards. Some more questions from the room, please. Yes, there. You could kindly introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Bonwa Kwankwa. I work with the African Circular Economy Alliance Secretariat. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, pertaining the research, did you drill into the potential that the academia has in, leading to sustained jobs? Margaret, in her response, alluded to the fact that, for example, the African continent has lots of young people that can with innovations that we adopt secular solutions and models. But then most of the efforts that I see these days in, transitioning to circular economy is heavy on advocacy and awareness creation. But trainings, workshops, I see those as short-term, mid-term solutions. But then when you go into scouting for long-term solutions, I feel that integrating circular economy into curriculum, right from, for example, primary schools, universities, secondary schools is very key. So that in the future, we don't gather here for a circular economy conference, but then when there's an agriculture sector conference, circular economy is one of the main things that's being discussed in those. So I'm just wondering how that has been thought through in the research that has been done.
Thank you so much. I could not agree more. And Solomon and I were also discussing before how when we look at the challenge in our countries, the only hope we see is youth. And it's the knowledge and the passion, the energy, and their anger also to change things that we have to draw on. But our economies are only as good as the people that make the economies work, right? So that's where education from preschool, primary, all the way up is so important. We have a section in the report that talks about skills, but maybe not as comprehensively as you have just laid it out. So we take that back as a recommendation to focus on that in our future work. It could, for instance, be something we co-create with ASEA. It could be a thematic brief on the power of education in advancing the circular economy in Africa. More questions, please. Yes, sir.
Yeah. My name is Dab Chiwamba, Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Green Economy and Environment from Zambia. The question goes to Solomon. First of all, just to agree with you that the informal sector will play a key role. We have to deal with the issue of garbage in developing countries. But just for interest's sake, I wanted to find out what is your success rate in terms of separation at source, working with the informal sector? 20%, 60%, where exactly?
Yeah, thank you very much. So we just started, we launched this program somewhere last year. And I may say we are still in the scoping stage, but it is not novel. In India, for instance, when you go to the municipality of Pune, we want to adopt their style, where the city authority has procured certain locally made trolleys from the informal technicians. And then in them, they place about 4 different receptacles. So as they push along the, the informal settlements, where we have the slums, the informal guys have been trained to be able to know that, yes, put your organic here, put your plastic here, put your paper here. And then beautifully, the city authority will also provide different trucks where the different source-separated materials will be placed in. And then the recyclables, right there. There is a middleman just by the truck who has a spring balance, and then we weigh the quantity of plastics. It's demand and supply. They know how much to earn from a kilo. Then they are paid. The organics, the city will take it to the processing site. And then the city authority will pay the informal guys just to make sure that their livelihoods are sustained. And then the work is done in a clean manner, not that you see them in very rickety, whatever. So that is exactly what we want to do. But we want to take our time with the education and sensitization. Because you can't just wake up one day, the people are used to mixing their waste, and then today you come, you tell them, no, we are separate. No, we want to take them a minimum of 2 years to have stakeholder engagements, especially with the community. Take them through how to do the source separation. And then once they get it, that is where we will roll the project on. Whilst also managing with the technology to be able to make sure that once we are set to go, then we know where to send what and not at the end of the day, you bring one track and they've so separated and you put everything into that track. So if you ask me, I may say we are still at the preparatory stage. And I hope maybe in a year or two, I'll come back and give you the actual success rate. But I know we'll rely on the India model and we are good to go.
Thank you for that question. We have time for 2 more quick questions and quick responses. First, the gentleman here. Could you kindly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Tim San from South Africa. I just had a quick question for and that is some of the living challenges that the banking sector, particularly the commercial sector, have around financing some of the novel models. I think Solomon just gave us a very quick one. He says it's not, but it is one of the novel models that if you were to present it today as an entrepreneur in a different context, you probably may not lend the funding from a commercial bank. So I just wanted to test with you. I mean, risk is one, data is one, but what are some of the other leaping challenges that the banking sector has? Thank you.
Excellent. And let's take the last question of the day. So we take 2 questions.
Yes, I'm Rada Brof. I'm from the GIZ in Egypt, from the Employment Promotion Project. We advise the Egyptian Ministry of Technical Education on improving the TVET system, including curricular development, teacher training, etc. And in the coming period, we will be supporting them in preparing the system, the TVET system, and the students for the green transition. So I'm interested actually in the topic of this session, and with building on that comment here on the skills part, would appreciate if you can shed some light on what the report covered in terms of the skills required and maybe more broadly competencies needed for jobs in the circular economy, if they are identified to start with. If not, then how is this in connection to skill requirements for green jobs at large?
Thank you very, very much. I'm not sure, maybe Esther, you can answer that last question. The first question was to you, Margaret.
So I think I'd add to the issue of the challenges that we face. Maybe I'll expound a bit on the risk aspect, especially from the financing angle of the bank. So often with these pilot ideas, because they are novel, they are untested, they're also very context specific, and de-risking the project is often one of our challenges as a bank. One of the approaches we've taken is to expand the number of instruments that are available to de-risk projects. We have partial credit guarantees, partial risk guarantees, and a number of other risk-sharing mechanisms that have been rolled out. But maybe the question would be, how does that then translate into jobs? I think one of the ways we've tried to mitigate that and to expand on the job creation angle is to have special funds that have been created. So within the energy sector, we have the Sustainable Energy Fund for All, for Africa, sorry. We also have a Jobs for Youth Fund. It's a multi-donor trust fund as well. So these funds come in between and they bridge the gap between the bank's financing and this initial idea. So when the business is able to then tap into these funds and scale up and show great potential and a need, it then is able to attract financing now from the bank in terms of a concrete investment. So that then helps in scaling up, which then leads to job creation. We do have a few examples that we have seen as well. One other angle is, of course, the equity investment approach that we're taking. We do have financing into equity and venture funds that then is able to manage the risk based on how they structure it. And through that, we were able to report on some of those impacts as well as the bank.
Thank you. And let's continue that discussion afterwards. In fact, I encourage all of you to stay here and chat with us afterwards. And I would like to join that conversation, if I may, because I'm sure I can learn things. That's the quick response to the second question.
Quick response is, skills is one of the things we looked into, and we broadly looked at the challenges and also how skills is emphasized in the research, but the focus wasn't the exact skills and competencies needed for secular jobs. However, that is something we do a lot of research on circular economy, so I can share some reports with you, and we have some ongoing projects with UNESCO, UNIVOC, specifically focusing on how to build capacity within vocational institutions to teach on the circular economy across disciplines. So happy to take that up afterwards.
And Namita?
Quickly to add, I mean, I think the skills will of course be sector specific. Depends on where you are introducing that circularity. But broadly, in a nutshell, we think that it might be like a T-shaped approach. What we are going to need are deep sectoral, horizontal, vertical skills in a particular function or a sector. We're going to need sort of understanding the whole process. So you want that depth of knowledge, but you also need the horizontal skills which are more transversal. So you'll need people to understand the whole system, not just their little slice of it. So it's going to go in both directions. Definitely social skills, because now you're going to have to work with different teams. If you are going to be we are going to be in a circular economy. We also probably are going to need a lot more digital skills, team spirit. So I think that those are some sort of key takeaways, but I think the detail will be in terms of how you map the value chain, the node of the value chain, and the sector in which you're introducing that pure circularity. So I think there's no like one clear answer.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. We have covered, with your help, also online, in very little time, a rich panel discussion. We've talked about the need for massive investments in waste management systems and infrastructure. We've talked about the need for new technologies. We've talked about the need to have innovation and tap into the ingenuity of the private sector, of a new generation of young entrepreneurs in Africa and in Finland. We have talked about the critical needs of skills and of education. Maybe we can think about this lifelong learning, because with the massive changes that the world is already bringing and that the circular economy will bring, this idea that we go to school for 20 years, work for 40 and then retire doesn't work anymore. We will constantly need to educate ourselves, to be educators and have opportunities to do that while we still keep our security and livelihoods. We need an enabling environment for businesses. We need stable policy regimes, clear signals from politicians and investors. We need to address informality and ensure a just transition to more formality, because that's the only way we will really address the obstacles that businesses are facing to growth and the obstacles that millions of workers toiling in the circular economy, in the informal economy, are facing each day when they try to make a living. Have to address informality if these workers are to enjoy their rights and to improve their lives for themselves, for their families, for new generations to come. We need better data, we heard, about material flows, but also about jobs. We need better data about a lot of things, so make sure that we do less preaching and more evidence-based talking. We need to learn from each other, we saw in this panel. South, north, east, west, rich, poor, country to country. We need better regulations, I heard you say. Smarter regulations, maybe you would say. Yeah.
I would, yes.
And with that, this mix of ingredients, I think we have the opportunity to create more just, more fair, more inclusive and diverse and prosperous circular economy. Let's give our panel a huge round of applause. Once we've wrapped up the session for today and help you clarify your thoughts, Esther, would you like to provide a few reflections on the day?
I'll be very quick. Thank you everyone so much. This has been a fantastic session and a great way to not only share what we've been doing and hear from the experts in the field, but also get a feeling of how we should be doing this and how we can all be working together. I won't summarize too much of what we heard, because Casper just did it beautifully. But I wanted just to remind you of our next steps. So this was the first step in our initiative. So we've put this research out here, encourage you to scan the QR code, share the report, read it, and come back to us for any discussions and elaboration you'd like and to collaborate. Our next step is to begin an extensive review of all of the indicators and models that are currently being used to measure the quality and quantity of jobs in the circular economy. and to do deep dives into different countries and value chains and themes so that we can really understand this transition a lot better and what it means for people. So, and we can't do that alone. So if there is a think tank or a research institute within your network, within the region that you work, that you think we should be speaking to, if you represent one of those yourselves or an organisation that wants to collaborate, or indeed that has projects that we can draw data from, we'd love to hear from you. So please reach out to us directly. You can go onto the initiative website and also fill in a contact form. But thank you so much for joining and being part of these first discussions and first steps of the initiative. And to have many more of these in the future.
Indeed. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our participants online. Thank you for a wonderful host, Citra, who not only hosted us, but the World Circular Economy Forum. Thank you for sharing and making this an interactive session. Thank you for bearing over with me. I'm an impossible moderator who ran 10 minutes over time and I didn't understand the questions. Thank you for this one of the most memorable afternoons in history.